The morning light filtered through the curtains, and the lingering headache forced me out of bed. I stumbled into the bathroom, took 2 aspirin, and leaned on the sink, hoping my queasy stomach would settle. My name is Ron Jamon, and yesterday my life was turned upside down. After a long day at work, I came home completely unaware of the emotional bomb waiting to detonate. Chrissy, my wife, looked at me with a mix of love and sadness before revealing that she'd been involved with another man for the past year. She explained that the man had been broken ever since a car accident took his wife's life, while he survived unharmed. Chrissy said she had tried to heal his wounded spirit, and over time their bond deepened into love and eventually became physical. She assured me her feelings for me hadn't changed, promising that she would return fully when he no longer needed her. Chrissy vowed to stay involved with our children and me, balancing her life between our family and this man she felt obligated to help. Her confession hit me like a punch to the gut, and in my shock I lashed out, calling her names as I tried to make sense of the betrayal. Chrissy didn't hold back in her response, accusing me of not truly loving or supporting her, throwing our wedding vows in my face. She argued that if I really loved her, I'd accept this situation, as painful as it was. That conversation left me reeling, questioning everything I thought I understood about love, loyalty, and marriage. Chrissy was clearly angry with me, and I was furious, unable to think straight. To avoid lashing out physically, I started drinking and yelling. When I finally calmed down enough to think, I asked her how she would feel if I found another woman. "Who would want you?" she sneered. "You're an overweight, middle-aged man with thinning hair." She warned me that if I tried to divorce her, she would ruin me. My mind was spinning, clouded with rage and confusion, and I kept drinking and yelling at her. She packed a bag and said, "I'm leaving to be with him until you calm down and accept the situation." Sitting on the bed, I tried to take stock of the situation. Chrissy wasn't wrong. I was middle-aged, my hair was thinning, and I had gained about 20 pounds. I couldn't change my age, but I could do something about my weight and hair. First, I needed to know where my kids were. It was Saturday morning, so they should have been home, but after searching the house I realized they weren't there. Where had Chrissy taken them? I was about to call her parents when I heard a car in the driveway. It was Chrissy's. I saw the kids getting out, so I met Chrissy at the door. "Good! You're sober," she snapped. "Where were the kids?" I asked. "They were with me. I couldn't leave them with you," she said sharply. "You didn't take them to his place, did you?" I hissed. "Watch your language, Ron," she retorted. "Yes, they were there. My friend is kind, unlike you yesterday. I wouldn't dare leave them with you." "Fair point," I admitted. "But why didn't you take them to your parents' place?" "They weren't home," Chrissy replied as she went upstairs. I followed her. "Are you staying or going back to him?" "Oh, Ron, stop acting like a child. I've already told you how things are going to be. I won't argue about it anymore. Accept it or don't. Even though you're acting like an idiot, I still love you. Once he no longer needs me, I'll be back full time." "So what do we do now?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Right now I'm packing a few things to spend a few days with my friend until you calm down and accept the situation." "What about the kids?" I asked, hoping to guilt her into staying, but it didn't work. "If you don't want to watch them, call my parents. They will." Chrissy packed another bag and left. My head felt like it was going to explode, but I knew I had to keep it together for the kids. I wasn't going to take Chrissy's affair lying down. No man with self-respect would. After she left, I checked on the kids and asked if they had any homework. They groaned but agreed to get started when I promised we'd visit their grandparents later. Chrissy's parents, Sam and Mary, lived nearby on a small farm. Sam, a retired tinkerer, had a large workshop where he and the kids were building go-karts. Sometimes I'd help too, being a certified mechanic at the local Ford dealership. I wanted to talk to Chrissy's parents to see if they knew about her affair and to get their advice. I'd always had a great relationship with them, considering them my surrogate parents since mine lived far away. But I worried they might side with Chrissy. While the kids worked on their homework, I made some coffee and started jotting down a list of things to do. I called my boss, Bob Clarkson, to fill him in on the situation. I'd been working at the dealership since it opened 23 years ago, and Bob had been my boss for 15 of those years. He was sympathetic, having watched his son go through a rough divorce where false accusations were thrown at him. "Man, she is one cold woman," I said, shocked at Chrissy's behavior. Tell me about it, Bob replied, bitterly. For a week we expected the police to arrest Gary. False accusations are devastating and hard to disprove. The cops get nervous anytime a woman accuses a man. The only thing that saved Gary was his ex-mother-in-law. When Carol told her mom that Gary had hurt her daughter, Bev, who's known for being tough but fair, immediately took the granddaughter to a doctor. The doctor confirmed nothing had happened. Bev went to the police and threatened to testify against her daughter if they pursued the case. She also warned Carol that she'd expose her pill problem, which would cost her custody. God bless Bev, I said, stunned at the lengths people would go to get their way. Amen to that, Bob agreed. If there's anything I can do to help you, let me know. If it's within my power, I'll make it happen. I requested the upcoming week off, using my personal and vacation days. Bob agreed without hesitation and even offered additional time if needed. There's something else, I said. I need a good divorce lawyer. That's easy, Bob responded. Use the same attorney my son hired during his divorce. He wiped the floor with Carol. Gary got primary custody, kept the house, and Carol has to pay child support. His name is Dwight Tucker. Let me grab his number. As Bob searched, he remarked, the uglier my son's divorce got, the more I kept hearing Tucker's name in my sleep. After a minute, Bob found the card. I called Dwight's office, not expecting anyone to answer on a Saturday, but luck was on my side. Not only was Mr. Tucker available, but his secretary told me there had been a cancellation, and he could meet with me if I arrived in 30 minutes. I told the kids I had to step out for about an hour and to behave. I arrived at Tucker's office in just 20 minutes. Dwight Tucker, a good-looking man in his mid-30s with striking blue eyes and a welcoming smile, greeted me warmly. I had no doubt he could sway a jury of women with ease. So, what can I do for you today? Dwight asked as I sat down. My wife told me yesterday that she's been cheating on me with a younger man, I said, feeling a mix of embarrassment and anger. I recounted the events of the previous day. Dwight took notes, shaking his head when I mentioned how Chrissy claimed to still love me but planned to keep seeing the guy. Hold on a second, Dwight interrupted, his expression darkening. Your wife says she loves you but will continue seeing this guy. Feeling humiliated, I nodded. All right, continued Dwight, encouraged. I explained how Chrissy became furious when I refused to accept her arrangement. I admitted that I'd called her names in my frustration. I painfully recounted how she had laughed when I asked how she'd feel if I found someone else, and how she insulted me, saying no woman would want me. She even threatened to ruin me if I pursued a divorce. She actually said all that? Dwight asked, incredulous. No offense, Mr. Jamin, but your wife either lacks empathy or has serious psychological issues. None taken, I sighed. I've thought the same thing. I then told him how she left the kids at her lover's house during our argument, and they spent the night there. Dwight's head snapped up, and he smiled as he jotted something down. Now for the big question, what do you want to do? Dwight asked, his fingers steepled. I can't live like this, I replied after a pause. I don't know if I can get past what she's done, but I don't want to be destroyed in a divorce or lose my kids. Dwight nodded sympathetically. That's a common concern when women face divorce due to their infidelity. I'll do everything in my power to minimize any damage she can cause. You'll get at least 50% of your joint assets. However, the courts don't care much about adultery, so you may still have to pay alimony and child support. I felt deflated, despite his reassurance. It seemed like I was still going to get taken to the cleaners. Yes, that's possible, Dwight agreed. But that's why we need to act swiftly. He glanced at his notes. Your wife abandoned the marital home and left your children at her lover's place, which is frowned upon by many courts. Right now you have custody, and will try to maintain that. I'll file for an emergency restraining order against your wife, which will allow you to stay in the house temporarily. The longer you're there, the stronger your case for primary custody. Does your wife work? He asked. Yes, part-time at the hospital on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, I answered, then added, that's probably where she met this guy. Dwight nodded. And how much does she make? About $25,000 a year, I said. I make around $80,000. I have to ask a tough question, and I want you to think carefully, Dwight said, looking me straight in the eyes. Do you still love her? Do you want to try to work things out? I stared at the floor for a long time before answering, tears streaming down my face. I do love her, but I can't accept this situation. She's humiliated me and broken her vows. I just want a divorce. Last question, Dwight said, flipping to a clean sheet of paper. Tell me about your assets. I quickly outlined our finances: $3,500 in checking, $44,000 in savings, and a $20,000 certificate of deposit CD. I had around $150,000 in my 401k, while Chrissy's retirement plan from her full-time job was a bit smaller. We also had 2 cars in both our names and a house with little equity since we had maxed out the loan when we bought it a few years ago. Here's what I need you to do, Dwight said, looking determined. Withdraw half of the checking, savings and CD amounts and transfer it into an account in your name only. I can't touch the CD without Chrissy's signature, I explained. No problem, Dwight replied, quickly calculating. Take $33,750 from savings. Pay as many bills as you can from the checking account. Cancel all joint credit cards and get one in your name. I still have a credit card from before we were married, I said. I rarely use it because our joint card has cashback rewards. Even better, Dwight smiled. You won't need to open a new one. He scribbled a list of instructions and handed it to me. Go to my secretary and have her call Taylor Locksmith to change your house locks. Then come back and we'll discuss the next steps. His secretary got Taylor Locksmith on the phone right away, and they promised to come by around noon. I returned to Dwight's office just as he was finishing a call. We're in luck, he said. If I fax the paperwork today, we'll get Judge Johnson. Why is that lucky? I asked. He despises cheaters, Dwight replied with a grin. He's an old-school judge who takes infidelity very seriously. This will work in our favor. If he wasn't available, I would have had to put in more effort, but since Judge Johnson is a family friend, he won't mind if I call him at home. Dwight stood and shook my hand. Before you head home, go take care of the bank stuff. I'll be preparing a petition for an emergency restraining order against your wife. She won't be allowed in the house or near you or the kids, since she's with her lover and left the kids there. This should help our case. It might be overturned later, but by then you'll be firmly established as the primary caregiver. By Friday, I'll have her served with divorce papers, and we'll see how she reacts. For the first time since Chrissy's revelation, I felt like I was regaining control. The bank wasn't busy, so I quickly got a cashier's check for my half of the money. I closed our joint credit card account, paying off the $537 balance from our checking account. I also paid the mortgage 2 months in advance, which cost another $2,600. With the cashier's check in hand, I went to a different bank and opened new accounts in my name only. When I got home, the kids were watching TV. I loaded them into the car and headed to my in-laws' place. Sam waved from his workshop as the kids ran to him. Inside, Mary greeted me with a kiss on the cheek, and a minute later, Sam joined us. I have something difficult to talk about, I said, taking a deep breath. I started Chrissy's having an affair, and I'm filing for divorce. I don't believe you, Sam shot back sharply. What proof do you have? She told me, I replied quietly, tears rolling down my face. Just then, the kids came inside. Please stay outside for a few minutes, I told them. Why? Dad, Ron Jr. asked. Because I said so, I snapped more harshly than intended. Seeing my tears, Ron Jr. pushed his siblings back outside. She told you? Mary asked, disbelief evident in her voice. Yes, I confirmed, recounting everything that had happened the night before, including Chrissy's insults and threats. They were shocked, and Sam's anger began to rise. I still don't believe it, Sam muttered. I'm going to call her, he said, pulling out his phone and placing it on speaker. Hey, Daddy, Chrissy answered cheerfully. What's up? Ron is here, Sam said. Are you having an affair? After a long pause, Chrissy finally responded. What did he say? He said you've been having sex with another man and that you love him. It's complicated, Daddy, Chrissy pleaded. I'm trying to help this man who went through a terrible tragedy. Sam's face turned red with rage. Have you been intimate with him or not? He demanded. We've been intimate, but I still love Ron, Chrissy stammered. I can't abandon this man right now. I love him too. I was stunned. Chrissy had always been a daddy's girl, and I thought Sam would make excuses for her, but his voice became strangled with emotion. Chrissy, Sam said, "I never imagined my daughter would become an immoral woman." "Daddy, please," Chrissy begged, but Sam hung up the phone. Moments later, the phone rang again. Mary moved to answer it, but Sam barked, "Leave it." Ignoring him, Mary grabbed the phone. Furious, Sam snatched it from her and hurled it against the fireplace, smashing it. "I said leave it alone," he screamed. Mary, shocked by his anger, backed away. I was equally stunned. The room fell into silence as Sam and Mary processed everything. After a long moment, Sam embraced me. "Ron, I'm so sorry," he said, his voice filled with regret. "I can't believe our daughter has done this to you. We'll support you in any way we can. Mary will talk to her later, but right now I'm too angry to even speak with her." I had to leave to meet the locksmith, so I gathered the kids into the car. Before leaving, I hugged Sam and Mary, inviting them for dinner to talk more later. On the drive home, Sally suddenly burst into tears. "Are you and Mum getting a divorce?" "Where did you hear that?" I asked. "From me," Ron Jr. said defiantly. I snuck back in and listened. I sighed, realizing the kids deserved to know, but unsure how to explain it in a way that wouldn't hurt them too much. Damn Chrissy, she hadn't thought about the kids while she was off with her new man. "Yes, it looks like your mother and I will be getting a divorce," I said softly. "But why?" Kyle cried. "Your mother has fallen in love with another man," I explained. "You mean she's having sex with him?" Sally asked through sobs. "I hate her. She's a total witch." "Sally, don't speak about your mother like that," I reprimanded, though I felt the same way inside. The locks were changed just in time. 10 minutes later, Chrissy's car came screeching into the driveway. She stormed out, fury in her eyes. "You told my parents, didn't you?" she screamed. "I bet you called me a slut and a whore."
"I thought you loved me, Chrissy," I said, my voice full of sadness. "I love you with all my heart, but I can't accept you being with another man. You hurt me deeply when you called me an ugly, middle-aged man that no other woman would want. I don't need your pity, love. And how can you claim to love me when you threaten to ruin me?"
Chrissy's face paled slightly, but she pressed on. "I'm sorry, okay? I didn't mean those things. I was just angry because you called me a slut and a whore. You promised to love and cherish me. If you really loved me, you'd accept this situation. I'm not leaving you for him, I love him too, but I'll come back to you when he's better." Shaking my head, I replied, "Chrissy, if you're going to quote our vows, remember you promised to forsake all others. A married woman doesn't sleep with another man just because he's hurting. I've accepted that you're not the same person I married. And I don't want you in my life anymore. Accept that, or don't. That's your choice." Chrissy's face flushed with anger, and she looked uncertain for a moment, but then her eyes narrowed with renewed defiance. "Ron, stop acting like a fool. I'm your wife, and I love you. I will come back to you when this man no longer needs me." My sadness had turned to pure hatred. "No, Chrissy, I don't know who you are anymore. My wife was loving and faithful, and I don't recognize you. For all I know, this might not be your first affair. I don't trust you anymore." Her face twisted in rage. "This isn't an affair, and he's the only one I've been with since we got married. He's hurt, and I'm helping him, whether you like it or not." "Do whatever you want," I said coldly. "But I don't trust you. I'll be getting a DNA test on the kids." "You're a complete jerk," Chrissy spat. "This is going to get ugly. Remember what I told you would happen if you tried to divorce me." "I'd rather die poor than stay with a woman without morals," I said, staring down at her. She didn't seem to understand the consequences that were coming. At that moment, a sheriff's car pulled into the driveway. The deputy stepped out and approached Chrissy. "Are you Chrissy Jamin?" he asked. "Yes," she replied, confused. "Ma'am, this is a restraining order. You're not allowed to enter the house and must remain at least 500 feet away. Do you understand?" "But that's my home," Chrissy stammered. "All my stuff is inside." "You have 15 minutes to gather your belongings," the deputy replied. I nodded in agreement. "I'll take my kids to the backyard," I said. I want to see my children, Chrissy demanded frantically. "Ma'am," the deputy said firmly, "the restraining order is to protect your children from you." Chrissy spun toward me, her face twisted with rage. "You did this. You're taking my children away from me." "No, Chrissy," I said calmly. "You did this. You abandoned our home and left our children at your lover's place." "I didn't abandon the house, and he's a wonderful man," she screamed. "I'm helping him by being with him." "If he's so wonderful, go live with him," I said coldly. "Give him your love, or does he just want to use you for his own pleasure?" I answered, more for the deputy's benefit than Chrissy's, as I led the kids to the backyard. I explained that their mother was gathering her belongings to take to her new partner's place, but promised they could see her before she left. When I brought them back to the front, Kyle was already crying, rushing into his mother's arms and begging her not to go. "Please, Ron," Chrissy sobbed, "can't you see what you're doing to the children?" I felt a surge of anger but pushed it down. "Don't bring the kids into this. I haven't done anything to them. You're the one who took them to your lover's house while you were with him." "Why can't you understand that I can't abandon him?" Chrissy pleaded, still crying. "You've already abandoned your husband, your children, and your home," I said coldly. "Now it's time for us to do the same to you. You never thought about the consequences of your actions, and now you're facing them." Ron Jr. looked at her, confusion on his face, while Chrissy tried to explain herself to him. It was obvious he didn't believe her. Sally, however, had no hesitation in unleashing her anger. "You're nothing but a selfish witch," she spat, shocking everyone as she actually spat in her mother's face. I had to hold Sally back to stop her from physically attacking Chrissy, demanding she apologize, though Sally stubbornly refused. Chrissy, blindsided by her daughter's reaction, fell to the ground, sobbing. Sally and Chrissy had been clashing lately, which I had chalked up to typical teenage rebellion. Now I feared their relationship was irreparably damaged. As I held Sally, Chrissy got up, ran to her car, and drove away, hitting the steering wheel in frustration. Kyle tried to chase after her, screaming, "Mummy, please don't leave us," but Ron Jr. caught him and brought him back. The deputy looked at me, sympathy in his eyes. "Mr. Jamin, I'm really sorry for what you're going through." But that evening, Sam and Mary came over for dinner. I had planned to grill burgers, but Mary took over the kitchen, making meatloaf and her famous macaroni and cheese, which the kids loved. While Mary cooked, Sam and I shared a couple of beers in the living room. He was clearly distressed by his daughter's actions.
I explained the restraining order and how Chrissy had left the kids unattended at her lover's house, which only deepened Sam's sadness.
Mary spoke to Chrissy about an hour after you left, Sam said, breaking the silence. "How did that go?" I asked, dreading the answer. "Terrible," Sam admitted. Mary tried to reason with her, but Chrissy's convinced that she's right, and we're all wrong. She thinks we're the horrible ones. Sam sighed heavily. Mary told her not to call us anymore and said she'd testify against her in court if it came to that. Dinner was a quiet, subdued affair. The only bright spot was Sam inviting the boys over to work on their go-karts the next day, which brought smiles to Ron Jr. and Kyle. Sally, however, sat with a sullen expression, barely touching her food. I let it go, knowing she was hurting as much as I was. On Friday, Chrissy was served with divorce papers at the hospital. Friends later told me she lost it, swearing at the process server and vowing to destroy me. She was sent home, or rather, to her lover's house. Chrissy hired a lawyer, Amber Wright, whom Dwight knew. He assured me she wasn't as skilled as she thought. Amber attempted to overturn the restraining order, but Judge Johnson only modified it, allowing Chrissy supervised visits with the children at the house, provided her boyfriend wasn't present. He warned her that any violation would result in her losing visitation rights entirely. Chrissy was happy at first, but quickly soured when the judge ordered her to pay child support, which forced her to return to full-time work. A few days later, the DNA results arrived. It took me nearly half a day to gather the courage to open the envelope. When I finally did, I was overwhelmed with relief the children were mine. I read and reread the reports, reassurance filling me with each pass. I realized that, no matter the results, I would have loved my kids the same. But even if Chrissy left her lover and returned home, I knew I could never forgive her. She was a toxic influence and needed to be kept away from the kids. I used all my personal and vacation days to be with the children, and when those ran out, Chrissy's parents stepped in to help. Sam and Mary refused to speak to Chrissy until she came to her senses. After a week of her incessant calls, Sam blocked her number. We were left to work out the visitation schedule, which meant our attorneys handled most of the communication. Chrissy was allowed visits on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays between 6 and 7 in the evening. Mary offered to supervise, but I insisted on being there for the first visit to set some boundaries. When Chrissy arrived on that first Monday, she stepped out of a car I didn't recognize, likely her lover's. She approached the house, smiling nervously.
"Hello, Ron. How are you?" she said tentatively, then turned to Mary. "Hi, Mum, it's good to see you."
"Chrissy, you need to leave," I snapped. "The judge said your boyfriend can't be within 500 feet of the house." A look of horror spread across her face. "He was just dropping me off." "Are you completely brainless?" I seethed. The judge was clear. "No lover here. Tell him to leave now, and I won't report it." Chrissy nodded and ran back to the car. I stepped outside and took down the license plate number as the car pulled away. "He'll pick me up later," Chrissy said defiantly when she returned. "Tell him to wait down the street." "I don't want him near the house," I said firmly. Her face filled with anger. "Ron, I'm tired of how you're treating me. You didn't have to steal money from our accounts or cancel my credit card." "I didn't steal anything. The money was used to pay off the credit card and make 2 mortgage payments. I wanted to make sure the kids had a home while we sorted things out. As for the credit card, I didn't want to be stuck with any charges you made while you're with your lover." Chrissy's face flushed with fury. "This isn't an affair, and he isn't my lover. You're being a jerk." Before I could respond, Mary stepped forward and slapped Chrissy across the face. Both Chrissy and I were stunned. "Chrissy," Mary said, her voice cold, "if you ever disrespect Ron again, I will tear that dress off and spank you red. Now, if you want to see the kids, go to the living room. I'll speak with Ron first and then join you. And be warned, if you do anything out of line, I will throw you out." Chrissy nodded meekly and went inside. "Ron, I'm sorry for my brainless daughter," Mary said, looking at me sympathetically. "Thank you for standing up for me," I replied, grateful. Then I left the room. 2 weeks later, as Dwight predicted, the restraining order was lifted, but by then I had established myself as the primary caregiver. Chrissy continued seeing her lover, so her child support payments remained. She was allowed unsupervised visits with the kids, but only in public places, and was forbidden from taking them to her lover's house or having him present. After 4 months of delays, our first court date to finalize the divorce arrived. Before the attorneys could begin, Judge Johnson asked if we had attended counseling. Both attorneys admitted we hadn't, so the judge ordered 8 sessions of marital counseling. Neither Chrissy nor I objected, though I thought it was a waste of time. I didn't want to anger the judge. Chrissy seemed convinced that she could sway me or the therapist into thinking her actions were justified. The first session with our therapist, Ann Patterson, played out just as I anticipated. Chrissy spent most of the hour explaining how what she was doing was somehow the Christian thing to do. Ann looked visibly taken aback by Chrissy's arrogance. In the second session, Ann began gently probing Chrissy's reasoning, asking her whether it would be fair if I were to start having an affair with another woman. I braced myself for an attack on my masculinity, but surprisingly it didn't come. Chrissy didn't respond immediately, but honestly I didn't care. Throughout the drawn-out divorce, I made some personal changes. When the woman you love tells you that you're not good enough, there's a natural drive to prove her wrong. I decided to undergo hair transplant surgery, which cost me about $4,000. I debated whether it was worth the potential teasing, but since I was on vacation, I went for it. My hair was trimmed short, and plugs from the back of my head were transplanted to the front. I stayed home for a week, telling the kids I had undergone a minor medical procedure. After 10 days, I began to resemble my old self, and as my hair grew, I felt better each week. I also started working out and running. Initially, I could barely run half a mile, but over time, I was able to run 10. I joined a gym and shifted our meals to healthier options. The kids weren't thrilled at first, missing their fast food, cookies, ice cream, and pizza. But I found fun, healthy recipes online, and even when a meal turned out less than ideal, we laughed about it, scraped the plates clean, and made sandwiches instead. cooking became a family activity. Despite the pain from Chrissy's betrayal, I started feeling better about myself. On my first day back at work, I received an unexpected confidence boost. The receptionist, Trudy, gave me a curious look but didn't comment on my new hair. "Welcome back, Ron," she said cheerfully, her eyes studying me. "There's something different about you." I felt myself blush slightly. Oh, I've been on a diet, lost 18 pounds so far, hoping to lose another 5. She laughed and nodded approvingly. "Well, it suits you. If I weren't married, I'd be all over you." "Thanks for the ego boost," I replied, trying to play it off, but according to my wife, I'm just an average, middle-aged guy with no appeal. So much so that she's found herself a lover. I tried to make light of it, but the joke fell flat. By now, everyone at the company knew what was going on. Storm clouds crossed Trudy's eyes. "Chrissy's an idiot. Either that, or she's not thinking straight. You're a great guy, Ron. Plenty of women would be lucky to have you. Don't let her mess with your head." That was the best boost I'd received in a long time. Suddenly, I didn't feel so much like a loser. My attention snapped back to the present when Anne asked Chrissy again, "Chrissy, how would you feel if Ron came home and told you he was sleeping with another woman?" As I mentioned, I was expecting Chrissy to take a jab at my manhood, but she didn't. I noticed her watching me during our first session, and I realized she could no longer criticize my thinning hair or weight. That gave me another small boost of confidence. I just sat back, waiting. Chrissy took her time, seemingly pondering how to respond. She couldn't very well say I wasn't allowed to be with another woman if she had another man. "Well," she said with her usual arrogance, "I guess if he was trying to help that woman through some kind of tragedy, I'd be okay with it." "And what if he told you he loved her, and the intimacy between them was great?" Anne pressed. Chrissy stuck to her position. "I would accept it," she said firmly, "but he'd have to promise me that the children and I would still be cared for." The session continued in the same vein, with Anne patiently trying to get Chrissy to see how unreasonable her stance was, but Chrissy remained stubborn. As I feared, these therapy sessions were turning out to be a waste of time. Chrissy was just using them as another opportunity to try and convince me that she was in the right. But that was never going to happen. By now, the initial shock of Chrissy's behavior had worn off. It's strange how love works when it isn't nurtured, it begins to wither. By the third session, something had changed. Chrissy showed up looking much more subdued and said very little, mostly just listening. Something had caused her arrogance to wane, likely Anne's compassionate but firm challenges to her justifications. I also noticed Chrissy sneaking glances at me when she thought I wasn't paying attention. I had continued to work out, losing a few more pounds, and all the yard work I had taken on had given me a decent tan. A couple of months before we began therapy, I had made another significant change. I was growing more dissatisfied with my job. While I still loved fixing cars, not just the engines, but also the bodywork, something was missing. I had been restoring old cars since I was 14, and now I was envisioning opening my own business to spend more time with my kids. I talked it over with Sam, and he agreed to help. I wanted to open my own shop but couldn't afford to just quit my job and dive in without risking financial ruin. Sam's farm, however, was in an industrial zone, and he offered to let me start my business in his workshop. The space was once a horse barn, but Sam had converted it into a tinkerer's workshop, and there was more than enough room for both of us. He even agreed to lease me a piece of land near the road to build my own place once I got the business off the ground. I spent my time at work studying how the dealership operated but scaled down my vision, knowing I wouldn't need the high-volume setup they had. They didn't do much bodywork on site and subbed most of it out. I focused on the basics, knowing I would need to build a paint booth. Sam not only supported the idea but also helped me construct it. I used the savings I had set aside from our joint account and took a small loan from Sam to get things started. I began working part-time, mostly on weekends and evenings, and it was fun. The kids often came by to watch or help out, and I loved teaching Ron Jr. how to do different things. Even Sally got involved, helping change out an engine or repaint a Corvette. She loved telling her friends about it, which seemed to make her more interesting to the boys at school. Business started picking up through word of mouth, and soon I was wondering whether it was time to make the leap to working full-time on my own. That decision came to a head when I was asked to work over the weekend to help with a backlog of orders. I couldn't do it though because I had customers of my own to take care of. I figured I was about to get fired, so I went in to talk to Bob. "Got a minute, Bob?" I asked, poking my head into his office. "Sure, Ron," he said, waving me in. "I'm glad you'll be working this weekend. We've got 44 cars coming in on Friday that need to be checked and prepped. We've got to get them out by the end of the month." I winced slightly at that. Most people don't realize that car manufacturers offer dealerships incentives for hitting certain sales numbers. If they sell a specific number of cars, they get a discount on the invoice. For example, the factory might offer a $150 discount per car. If the dealership sells 300 vehicles in a month, that's a $45,000 savings. But if they sell only 299, they get nothing. It was crucial for the dealership to meet these goals. And that's when I had to break the news. "Bob," I said, feeling the sweat trickle down my back, "I can't work this weekend. I've sort of started my own business on weekends and I've got commitments." Bob's response was firm but not unexpected. "I'm sorry, Ron, but if you can't work this weekend, I might have to let you go." "I understand, Bob," I replied, resigned to the situation. "I just hope there are no hard feelings. I've been building up my own business because I want to spend more time with my kids and save extra for their college funds. I'll clean out my locker." Bob sighed, looking disappointed. "I hate to lose you, Ron," he said, before pausing. "Tell me more about your business. Where are you set up, and what kind of work are you doing?" I explained that I had established my operation on my father-in-law's property, detailing the tools and equipment I had, and mentioned that I could handle almost any type of car repair, including bodywork. "Go get yourself a cup of coffee and come back," Bob said as he reached for his phone. Not feeling like having coffee, I went to my locker and started packing my belongings into a box. Losing this job was going to make things tough for a while. I'd have to put the kids on Chrissy's health insurance since I had removed her from mine. Still, I felt confident that I could manage. I was already turning down nearly as much work as I was taking on. When I returned, Bob waved me into his office with a different energy. "I've got a deal for you, Ron," he said, clearly excited. "If you work this weekend, we'll reimburse you for any money you lose if your customers get upset." I shook my head. No, I couldn't do that to my customers. "Hold on, I'm not finished," Bob said, sliding a paper across the desk. It was an independent contractor's agreement. "I really need you this weekend, and I think you could convince your customers to wait a few days. If you can and your shop passes our inspection, we'll hire you as an independent contractor to handle some of our bodywork." I was stunned but grateful and took the offer. After that, I was essentially working full-time at my own business. Occasionally, I'd still go into the dealership if they needed help and I had the time. Sam began helping part-time and Mary took over the bookkeeping. I was now earning more than I had ever made at the dealership. The only thing still out of place in my life was my marriage. After the 4th counseling session, I was ready to quit. I no longer cared much about Chrissy's relationship with her lover. Don't get me wrong, it still hurt to think of my wife with another man, but the sting wasn't as sharp. By the 5th session, I decided to go on the offensive, hoping that confronting Chrissy might lead her to end these pointless therapy meetings. When Anne asked if I had anything to say, I didn't hold back. "Chrissy, I began, I've come to the conclusion that you're not only selfish but also incredibly cruel. How dare you tell the man you claim to love that he's just an ugly, middle-aged guy who no woman would want? You hurt me in a way that I don't think I'll ever fully recover from." Tears streamed down Chrissy's face as she sobbed. "Oh God, Ron, I'm so sorry. I'm ashamed I ever said that. If I could take it back, I would. I do love you, just not enough to leave him." "Keep your apologies," I snapped. "You need them more than I do." Chrissy's sobs became uncontrollable, and no matter what Anne or I said, we couldn't calm her down. Eventually, Anne called an end to the session but gave us homework to complete before the next one. I wasn't looking forward to it, convinced that the sessions were a waste of time. The homework included questions that made sense, like asking about our relationships with our parents or the state of our sex life. But some questions seemed irrelevant, such as our favorite food or what kind of car we drove. One question, though, really made me stop and reflect. If you could change one thing, what would it be? I thought about it for a day before writing that I wished I had been a better husband so my wife wouldn't have stopped loving me. At the next session we handed in our answers, but Anne didn't even look at them. Instead, she opened with, "Do either of you have any questions or anything you'd like to discuss?" "I do," I said immediately, turning to Chrissy. "I don't think these sessions are helping us. You've made it clear that you're not going to leave your friend Bruce Hartman. That leaves us with no chance for reconciliation. Why don't we stop this and get the divorce over with?" Chrissy looked shocked. "How do you know his name?" she asked. "The first time you came over to visit the kids, I got his license plate number. After that, it wasn't hard to find out who he was. But it doesn't matter, I have no interest in getting back at him or talking to him. I just don't care anymore. I want to move on." For the first time, Chrissy's eyes filled with genuine sadness. I hated seeing her in pain, and part of me wanted to comfort her, but I knew it wouldn't change anything. "I know your lawyer hasn't been happy with the settlement offers," I continued. "I've told my attorney to offer more. I'm willing to give you more visitation with the kids, and I'll even offer $1,000 a month in alimony for 3 years. I just want this over with." Chrissy's expression remained sorrowful, but she had made her choice. She wasn't going to stop seeing the guy, and I couldn't accept my wife being with another man. I still couldn't fathom how she thought I would ever live with that arrangement. But none of that mattered anymore. I was done. "I know what you said about me was partially true," I continued. "It hurt when you said it, but as time passes I realize I'm moving on. I've made changes. I'm not the same man you thought so little of when you started seeing Bruce. I've even started dating. After we're divorced, you can take care of your lover all you want. But it's time to end this, if nothing else, for the sake of rebuilding your relationship with the kids." At that, Chrissy burst into tears and ran out of the room. Anne, looking as surprised as I was, finally gathered herself and told me she wanted to see Chrissy alone for the next session and then have me come in alone for the final one. With a heavy sigh, I agreed. Months later, I no longer felt consumed by rage and hatred. Instead, I was just exhausted. The whole situation had taken a toll on me, Chrissy, her parents, and especially our kids. I wanted the pain to end. By this point, the anger over Chrissy's affair had subsided. When I showed up for my final session with Anne, I was relieved that Chrissy wasn't there, and even more relieved that this marked the end of therapy. "Ron, I want to commend you for your patience during these sessions," Anne began. "I know this entire ordeal has been incredibly painful for you. After speaking with Chrissy last week, I think I finally understand what happened with her." I leaned forward in my seat, eager to hear an explanation for why Chrissy had torn our marriage apart. "Do you remember the homework I gave you?" she asked. I nodded, barely recalling the assignment. I had thought it wouldn't amount to much. "The way you both answered one particular question surprised me," Anne continued, pulling out 2 pieces of paper from her folder. "The question was, if you could change one thing, what would it be? Do you remember that?" I nodded again. "You said you wished you had been a better husband so your wife wouldn't have stopped loving you." When Chrissy heard that, she broke down and cried harder than I'd ever seen. It took a long time to calm her down. I didn't know how to respond, so I stayed silent. "Ron, your wife never stopped loving you." "Yeah, that's why she kept sleeping with Bruce, right? Because she loved me so much," I said, sarcasm dripping from my voice. Anne gave me a disapproving look, then sighed. "What I discovered about Chrissy is that she's been going through a severe midlife crisis. As the kids got older, she felt like her life was slipping away. Chrissy is, and probably always has been, a caring person. Along the way, she found Bruce, who desperately needed her. She confused her desire to feel young again and Bruce's need for comfort with love." "That doesn't change anything," I said firmly. "She's still sleeping with him." "No, actually she's not," Anne replied. I blinked in surprise. "Then why didn't Chrissy tell me?" Anne sighed. "I know this doesn't change how you feel, but you should know the whole story. Bruce left town the same day you told Chrissy you were going to start dating and move forward with the divorce. She thought she had already lost you." I paused, considering her words, but as Anne suspected, it didn't change much. Too much damage had been done, and I couldn't see myself ever trusting Chrissy again. Most of all, I wanted my kids to reconnect with their mother. Sally's grades had dropped significantly, and she was still furious with Chrissy. Kyle had become withdrawn and started acting out at school. Ron Jr. seemed to be handling it better, but he avoided any conversation about his mother. Maybe that was worse than what the girls were going through? I wasn't sure. One last thing, Ronan said, pulling out Chrissy's homework. This is what Chrissy wrote in response to the same question: if I could change one thing, it would be that I never met Bruce Hartman. The divorce was finalized, and as per the agreement, Chrissy visited the kids on Wednesdays and Fridays. I made sure to take the kids out on Fridays before Chrissy arrived. At first, our interactions were stiff and uncomfortable, but over time we began to share meals together with the kids. One evening, Chrissy asked if she could stay the night. No, I replied with a laugh. The guest room bed isn't exactly 5-star. You're better off going back to your place. And don't get any ideas we're never going to be alone together. As for Bruce Hartman, his story wasn't entirely truthful. His wife had died in a car crash, but it happened after she caught him cheating and sped off in a fit of rage. As for why he left town, it might have had something to do with the beating he took outside a local bar: 5 broken ribs, a busted kneecap, several missing teeth, and a couple of other injuries. I may have called in a favor. It was worth it. Over time, Chrissy repaired her relationship with the kids, at least with Sally and Kyle. There was always a distance between her and Ron Jr. Surprisingly, Sally, who I thought would hold a grudge, was the first to embrace her mother again. Chrissy also mended things with her parents, though her father remained a bit distant. We often had Sunday dinners with them, like a family, except we weren't a family anymore. Chrissy kept apologizing, but I finally told her to stop. I'll never forgive you, so there's no point in trying, I said bluntly. This is how things are now, Chrissy. Accept it or don't, it's up to you. But we're never getting back together, not even if you were the last woman on earth and humanity depended on it.
3 years later, I remarried, this time to Sally's teacher. How we met is a story for another day, but what matters is that the kids love her and have accepted her as part of the family. Chrissy still hasn't fully accepted that I've moved on, but there's nothing I can do about that. After all, the discussion is over. Whether she accepts it or not is up to her.